Will you please do me a favor and close your eyes, everyone? I want you to imagine a dusty road under a hot sun. It's noon in the desert, it's hot, and it's dry. If you breathe through your nose, you can smell that water's nearby, and you can hear in the distance seagulls. There's a faint smell of fish in the air, but mainly it's dusty and hot. You're in a small town. There are 100 houses or so, and the roads are dirt roads, and you're walking up to a house on a small, narrow street. The house is small, maybe 10 feet wide. It was once whitish, but now it is no longer. The house has a flat roof, no windows, a small doorway. You'd have to stoop to enter. And outside this house is a huge crowd. Tens of people are peering into the darkness, trying to hear what is going on. Can you imagine the house? Can you smell the fish? Can you feel the heat? Can you see the scene? Most of you can. I cannot. All I hear is my voice. When I close my eyes, the only thing I can see is darkness. And when I try to smell, all I smell is, well, basically this church. I have a condition, it's called aphantasia. It's a very strange thing, and only very recently have we discovered that this is actually a condition. A professor in Exeter, I forget his name, he discovered this in 2015. It's a condition where you do not have a mind's eye, where you cannot visualize imagery at all. I only realized very recently, a couple of years ago, that this is abnormal. I never knew. People always said to me, close your eyes, imagine a beach, and I thought that they were not really being serious. I never realized people can actually imagine a beach. I can close my eyes, I can describe the beach. There's sand and sea, waves and water, seagull, suntan lotion, beach, towel, but I have no idea how that would look unless I actually see it. When I discovered this was abnormal, I was quite shocked, and I went to my wife and we had hilarious conversations because I said, can you imagine this? And she said, yes, of course. And I was like, huh. And then I said, can you imagine this? She said, yes, of course. And I said, huh. She can apparently imagine music in her head and can't understand that I cannot. If I listen inside my head, all I hear is my heartbeat or nothing. Now, as far as medical conditions go, I think this is quite minor. I lived for 35 years. I never even knew I had it. Does this make my life more difficult? I have no idea because I have no frame for comparison. But it has benefits. I am never disappointed when a book is made into a film. Because when I see the film, I can finally see what other people were seeing. It also has major disadvantages. I find it very hard to describe someone because all I remember is that that person is like a person, and I don't know. It's Anton. If I think really hard, I think Anton had a beard, but that's all I can remember. It also makes it very hard for me to recognize faces and tell them apart because, once you get past a beard or not a beard, that's kind of as far as my memory goes. And when I discovered that apparently I have this weird abnormal brain, I began to wonder about ability and disability, health and sickness. Does this seemingly very minor condition impair me? Should I pray to the Lord that He cures my mental blindness? Do I need to look forward to this day in heaven where I'll finally be able to see things in my brain? Or not? Let's talk about that. Let's get back to that house that you saw and I did not. That house is Jesus' house, and Jesus is speaking the word in that house. But the story is not about the word. 4 people appear on the scene, and between them, they are carrying a fifth person. And that person that they're carrying is paralyzed, unable to walk. In the Greek, the word is something like he's not free to move. He is what we may call someone with a disability. He cannot move independently. And these 5 people here are not by chance. They are looking in this house for Jesus. And we can imagine why, right? Because Jesus is the healer. Do you know? Jesus healed me once. He healed me from a deathly sickness. I don't remember this, but I know it from stories, from my family, from my parents. My parents came into my room late one night, and I had a terrible fever. The next morning, the fever was worse, and they took me to the GP. The GP took me to the hospital, and that afternoon, I was in a coma. Meningitis, inflammation of like the membranes of your brain. And the consultant said it was too late. It would be better if they took me home to die. But my parents had faith. That, or they were really, really desperate, and they turned to the Lord. Every person they knew, they called up on their phone. This was like the 90s and the 80s even. And they called them on the phone and they said, pray, pray, pray. And everyone was praying. Everyone that could be contacted in Cape Town was on their knees praying for me. And as my parents prayed, I was healed. I awoke. Why was I healed when millions are not? Was it really God? Or was it chance? Was I lucky? Or was I faithful? Every person, was I lucky or was I faithful? Now, you don't have to be a great theologian to realize that there is a very strong connection in the Bible between faith and health. If we read the Gospels, every person who is ill, sick, or has a disability and encounters Jesus is healed. 100% cure rate. Every person with any type of condition that shows faith, every single one of them is healed. You also don't have to be a great theologian to notice that usually there's a connection between sinfulness and sickness in the Gospels. Often these words are used interchangeably. And these two things I've just said are very, very troubling for us for a number of reasons. And I really think we need to think about them carefully today. The prominence of the stories of healing and the constant way that faith is associated with healing and wholeness marginalizes people. It marginalizes people who are ill. It marginalizes people who struggle with various impairments and disabilities. And Mark, as he writes this gospel, is forcing us, for some reason, to think about physical impairment in relation to sin. And this leads very easy to very poor theological questions. Why did I get so sick? How did sin contribute to a 4-year-old child almost dying? And why was I healed when others were not? Why was I healed when others were not? And thus, if we look at the Bible superficially, the context of sickness and healing automatically becomes a context of faith. But that is a scary, scary place to go. Because what does it say about the faith of those who are not healed? It's very easy for us to read the gospel and to think very simplistically about physical impairment, disabilities, and sickness. It's very easy for us to read the gospel and associate any type of condition with a lack of faith. It is so very, very easy for us to do that. But trust a theologian, the gospel is never easy. And we are not taking that easy road. Let's go back to Capernaum, back to Jesus. We have this person there carried by 4. A person lying on a mat. Now, it's tricky to move through a crowd when there's 4 of you carrying a mat with someone on top of it. And these people just can't get access to Jesus. They are struggling with accessibility. Yet, they are not caught out by a simple challenge. They mitigate these challenges. They can't access the house via the door. The way that all the other people are entering the house is not a suitable way to enter the house for them. Their entrance is impaired, so they look to mitigate. They look for an accessible entrance. And the 4, they climb the house. They find the spot directly above Jesus. They stand on this flat roof that is made of timber slabs, covered with thatch, covered with clay. They stand on that. Jesus is below them, and they will access Jesus through there. And thus, these four do what everyone who is struggling with a disability must do: mitigate and adapt. I awoke from that coma, as you can imagine, because I'm standing here. But I had suffered significant brain damage. My motor skills were absolutely gone. I had to learn to adapt. I had to relearn to walk. I spent half a decade in physical therapy, yet I still write very poorly, just ask my students. I can't hold something straight unless I constantly look at it, otherwise my hand just turns automatically. If I climb stairs, I have to look at each step, otherwise I will always trip. But I've mitigated that. I type when I don't have to write. I carry my cups of fluid very, very carefully and watch them all the time. I don't fill them all the way to the top so that if I do this a little bit, at least, the floor doesn't get too wet. And I often look where I'm going, and I'm trying to see if any of the students who saw me fell last week are here. Probably not. I tripped and fell on the quad because I looked behind me for a second just a couple of days ago. And now we are getting to, I think, what are the real questions about this. Why did Jesus heal me, but leave me like this? Why did he let me live, but make the rest of my life hard? And let's face it, let's just be really, really honest here. These struggles I'm mentioning, they're hardly worth mentioning. They're my struggles, and I feel afraid to share them, but they're very, very minor. Look at the worse impairments, the greater accessibility issues out there. And when we get to these questions, when we say, well, why was I healed but not completely? We start to think we're getting to theological meat. But we're not. The four on the roof, they put down the mat and they start to dig. And I have no idea what tools they have, but they seem to crack this hard sun-dried clay. And they dig it out. They rip out the thatch. They even have to remove some of the timber to get a full-grown person through the roof. And in this house, Jesus is speaking. Does he continue? Does he stop? When the dust starts to fall on his head, does he look up and wonder what's going on? As the sounds of what must have been, quite heavy construction sound from above, does he have to stop his talk? As the whole house needs to adapt so that one person suffering from a disability needs to enter, does Jesus sigh? Does Jesus complain? As suddenly a person is lowered through a brand new skylight, does Jesus dive aside? The only thing we know is that Jesus, dusting plaster from his hair, looks down on this paralyzed person and he sees what? Faith. He sees the faith of the four diggers on the roof. He sees the faith on the person on the mat. He sees faith that time and time again is the proper response to Jesus. He sees that faith has become tangible. It has become flesh. It has become blood. Faith itself has destroyed Jesus' house. Faith itself has destroyed Jesus' sermon. Faith itself has given Jesus a brand new skylight. Faith itself has put this undesirable person in the middle of Jesus' house. And that faith is lying on the floor, looking up, and expects a response. Faith lies on the mat. Faith looks up into the eyes of Jesus, and faith expects a response. And in that moment, as Jesus sees faith, and faith waits for the reaction, Jesus gives his action. Jesus says, son. He doesn't say dude. He doesn't say vandal. He doesn't say insane person who just apparently ruined my house. He doesn't say, oh, you paralyzed person. He doesn't even name the man by name. None of that. Jesus says, son. I was the pastor of the retirement home, the Adventist retirement home in Holland for many years. And that is a wonderful and a terrible job. And ask me why sometime. Maybe if you've worked with elderly people, you know. And one thing that you notice very clearly in a job like this is how society treats people who are no longer useful. We like to clean them up, put them out of sight, put them out of mind. We like to hide them. We like to put them away. And though I, as their pastor, saw these elderly people every day, they would hardly ever see anyone else. And as they became older, and as they became less able and less mobile, they would see less and less of people and become less and less of society. And as they became sicker and as they developed more impairments, they would become more and more isolated. And this relates to how we see sickness and illness in our society. We see people getting ill, and it kind of doesn't feel great. First off, just because we worry that it could happen to us. Second off, because it forces us to adapt and do certain things. But third, it reminds us how much our usefulness for society depends on how well we can function. And we see that as soon as people start to be able to function well, they lose contact with society. Illness, sickness, impairment, disability, all of these things stop you from functioning well. And thus people stop seeing you as a useful part of society. So when you go to the doctor for healing, what does the doctor do? Makes you function again. Gives you something so you can go back to work, back on your feet. And that is what we consider healing. That is healing for us. But in ancient times, they imagined healing a very different way. It was, in fact, the exact opposite. They had no understanding of interesting things like biology and viruses. And they didn't think sickness caused your problems. They saw sickness as a symptom of your problems. And they would reason along these lines. If you wake up one day and you notice you're not part of society, well, obviously there must be something wrong with you. And what could be wrong with you? Oh, I must be unclean. Oh, I must be sinful. Oh, I must be sick. And this paralyzed person, and we can always see this throughout the Bible, people who struggle with sickness and disabilities in the Bible are never part of society. And we think, oh, they're not part of society because they're sick or because they're struggling with various ailments. But people back then thought they were sick because they were not part of society. That social exclusion itself caused the sickness. And having worked with elderly people for many years, I don't think they were very wrong. And therefore, for this man on this mat, whether his legs worked or not was not the issue. The issue was not with his body. The issue was a social issue. He was an outcast. He was undesirable. He was unclean. And thus he was a sinner. And because he was all of those things, he could be nothing else but sick or paralyzed. And if Jesus had just made him walk again, that would not have solved any of his problems. The man did not come there to walk again. The man came there to walk home. His legs were not the issue. So what does Jesus do? Jesus looks down at this undesirable, unclean person. Jesus looks down at this man who just ruined his roof. Jesus looks down at this social outcast. Jesus looks down at him and says, "Son." And the story could stop there. The rest of the story, as far as I'm concerned, is a lot of window dressing. Jesus has just given an outcast a family. Jesus has just said to this person, you are not an outcast, but you are my son. Jesus has given the homeless a home. The man without standing now has standing, even though he cannot stand. And he is part of society again. And he is healed. He can't walk yet, but he's healed. And Jesus continues and pronounces his sins forgiven, and we often focus on that story. But for the man on the mat, everything after son was just background noise. Because the moment he heard that, he realized, I am healed. And this is what we should be noticing. This person was not just here so that Jesus could show how great he is at doing miracles. This person was not just there for an interesting discussion about the nature of Christ and the Son of Man and if Jesus can forgive sins or not. The person is not there to demonstrate how powerful God is. The person is not there as some kind of backdrop. The person is there because that person is quite literally the center of the message. Jesus heals, but that never is Jesus' goal. Jesus wants people to be part of society again. Jesus wants no one to be outcasts. Jesus wants everyone to be desirable. Jesus wants social change. Now we know that in the time of Jesus there were many healers. We even see Jesus saying, there will be a lot of people coming who do signs and miracles and healings. What sets Jesus apart is that, yes, he does heal, but his main thing is social change. The miracle here is not letting the man walk again. The miracle is that this man can now walk home. And as I was studying this passage, I've been reading it with my first years in Greek. We've been thinking about it a lot, and only this week did it really hit me. Hit me what the story is about. As I was studying this, as I thought about this spot in the passage, this spot in the narrative, that is when the word hit me. This is when the penny dropped. I realized I've been looking at the story wrong. I've been thinking about myself. I've been feeling sorry for myself. I've been identifying myself with the paralyzed person. But I was wrong. You see, I'm not the man on the mat. I'm the scribe sitting listening to Jesus. I have not been carried to lie at Jesus' feet. I've been sitting at Jesus' feet all along. I'm not the man who desperately wants any type of glimpse of Jesus. I am the scribe who've been sitting and watching everything. I am the one of privilege, born at Jesus' feet. I am the man of privilege who has always been in the house. I'm not the outcast. So, if we think about this carefully, this man on the mat was never paralyzed. He was never disabled. He wanted to see Jesus, and he was able to see Jesus. He had friends, and he saw what he wanted. And Jesus restored his life. But the scribes, Tom, is sitting there and judging. The scribes are the ones that are paralyzed to react to Jesus. The ones that cannot accept Jesus' message. They are the ones that are stuck, the ones that are trapped in themselves. They are the ones that are caught in their worldview. They are the ones that cannot access Jesus' message. They are the ones that cannot even come close. The man on the mat is not disabled. The man on the roof is not disabled. It is the scribes. The scribes are unable to believe. The scribes cannot have faith. The scribes cannot accept Jesus' message of equality of all people. The scribes can't let other people be greater than themselves. The scribes can't let the last be first. The scribes are the ones who can't bring people to Jesus. They are the ones who can't believe the gospel of love and acceptance. They see Jesus, they see what he does, and they cannot reply. They hear Jesus, but cannot accept his words. Jesus is the action, but they have no reaction. And so Jesus heals this man. He heals him socially, physically. He sends him home, back to social acceptance. And the crowd, they too are amazed. They are besides themselves. They glorify God in the last words of the narrative. They see Jesus' action and have the right reaction. They have faith. They believe. They accept. So I guess maybe I've been asking the wrong questions. My questions of why did God heal me? Why did God not heal me properly? Why do I have these minor impairments in my life? Why do others that I know have such more severe impairments? All of these are the wrong questions to ask. We've been looking at ability, accessibility, disability wrong. Jesus didn't come for physical healing, but for social healing. The Word of God is restorative. It is forgiving. And Jesus, yes, brings sight to the blind to see God. Jesus sets the captives free to find God. Jesus lets the lame walk to approach God. Jesus brings sight to the blind to see injustice. Jesus sets the captives free to help others. Jesus lets the lame walk to lead others to safety. Jesus' action should cause our reaction. Yet I think many of us sit like scribes. The crowd outside Jesus' house, they exclaim, "We've never seen anything like this." And it's not about the healing, because they'd seen that more often. False prophets did it too. They have never seen anything like Jesus. They have never seen such a power for social change. They have never seen someone care for the undesirables. They have never seen someone touching the lepers. They have never seen someone looking out for the blind. They've never seen someone talking to women. They have never seen people preaching true equality. This message of freedom, of love, that is what they've never seen. But now they have. They have seen Jesus' action, and they have a reaction. They will carry the paralyzed and will feed the poor. They will care for the sick and touch lepers. They will love their enemies and give their lives for strangers. They will bring Jesus' message of care and love and equality to every tongue, tribe, and nation. I look around and I see paralysis all around me. I see scribes, far too many scribes. People who look the other way when they see undesirables. People who don't want equality if it's gonna hurt them in any way. People who ignore the homeless. People who like refugees very, very far away from their own country. People who can't be bothered to help other people. People who push the weak, the outcasts, to the edges of society. The people that do that, they are the paralyzed. They are the scribes of this narrative who cannot react to Jesus. And I'm sad to say, all of us have a bit of scribe inside of us. All of us, at one stage or another, drift towards sitting on the edge of Jesus' house. All of us like to rest in privilege. All of us are paralyzed at one time or another. So let me share a final thought with you. If we are paralyzed, who is carrying us to Jesus? The physically paralyzed person needed 4 people to carry him, to break through the roof, to bring him at Jesus' feet. He had good people around him to help him. But what about those scribes? Who was carrying the scribes? Who was helping the scribes? They too are paralyzed in a much, much worse way. Why did no one carry them? Why did no one help them? I look around me and I see paralysis. I see Jesus' action, but I see no reaction. Where is our reaction? How are we reacting to Jesus' healing message? How are we bringing Jesus' message of social change to the world? To whom are we carrying Jesus' message of love and equality? Who did you carry last week? Who will you carry this week? Who's carrying you? Who's laying you at Jesus' feet? I look around and I see paralysis. I see hate, discrimination, sexism, racism. I see arrogance. I see egotism. I see paralysis all round, and I wonder, who is carrying the paralyzed? We, my friends, must carry them. For if we do not, who will? Amen.